Hello.
Good
How are you?
morning. Hey
How's
there.
every? Hello, this is Paul Ricci. I'm with Nork at the University of Chicago. I'm here interviewing Michael Fedor. He's a political thriller author I met at the Festival of Books in the Alleghenies. So I extended the invitation for all the authors to they're welcome to be interviewed either at the festival or on Zoom. And excuse me. And well, Michael Fedor took me up on it. So, okay, yes, he is an author of political thrillers. His latest book is What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose. About, okay, you can read a synopsis of it here. Former Senator Jackson Piper, humiliated by national defeat, is drawn from his quiet retreat by a plot to hijack the 2044 election. He resurrects the Bull Moose Party but discovers it will take more than the most votes to survive the election. Okay, so I take it, were you an admirer of Teddy Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party?
Yeah, definitely a fan of Teddy Roosevelt and the spark of the interest of the 1912 election. That's kind of one of those forgotten pieces of history. The last major third party to win electoral college votes kind of has gone by the wayside. So really became an awesome instrument to tell a
Well,
powerful
George Wallace
futuristic.
did win electoral college votes in 1968, but
Yeah.
sorry to
Um,
correct you.
Thank you there. And so what was interesting is the Bull Moose Party actually won more electoral college votes than the incumbent president. So it really
Yeah.
became one of those historic moments in history.
Well, certainly a lot of the things he was promoting, like universal health care back then, was certainly popular. I mean, there was even another candidate, Eugene Debs, who got 6% of the vote that year.
Yeah.
Certainly it was a rebuke of the Republican Party, and so and so like I mean, I read your bio in Goodreads, and you said you had worked as a political activist for a long time.
Yeah, I worked in state, local, and federal campaigns as a political operative for more than 20 years. That's after a 5-year career teaching public school. And I got to work for some tremendous leaders of both major political parties in the United States. And I think the closer I got to the really higher offices, the more I saw pursuing this power changes people, not always in good ways. And even my own pursuit of public office, I won, I lost. By the time I reached my 20th year, I really felt like I had kind of reached the point where I no longer wanted to be part of it professionally. It just was not fulfilling anymore. And so I tried to transform that experience and that excitement into some of those stories into some thrilling fiction writing for some readers. And that's what I've done with the first book in the series, the Bull Moose series, What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose.
Okay, so is that so would you say like what you saw, like the reality of how politics works can be very disillusioning sometimes. I
Yeah, I
mean,
would
I'm sure.
I would point back to the movie The Candidate with Robert Redford. If your audience is familiar, he is an idealistic young buck who's going to run for U.S. Senate in California and thinks he's big time. The closer he gets to actually winning, the more it transforms him into the very thing he's trying to run against. These like just talking
Mhm.
point machines that say nothing of any substance. And unfortunately, some of my experience was watching really good people transform into people who just spout talking points as talking heads in interviews and kind of just running from one election to the next, raising money and forgetting ultimately why did they run in the first place and what are they actually getting done? And that's the
Yeah,
kind of the call to action here in this book.
I guess we're kind of seeing that with JD Vance.
Yeah, a little bit, right? Um,
Who
Actually,
wants compared Trump to Hitler and
yeah,
now,
now he's his running mate.
yeah.
Yeah, so in the book it takes place in the future and it imagines things are worse in a lot of ways. Political violence is more extreme. The very nature of truth itself, which has been much in the news recently, takes another turn for the worse. People really can't discern fiction from reality because of the advancements in AI. In fact, they rely on a tool called the mark to automatically assess any piece of content and determine if it's factual truth, modified, or false. And that becomes a very powerful tool that could potentially be subject to corruption in the story. And it was one of the ways that the sitting president, who is not well liked, intends to run and steal his reelection is by leveraging the billionaire and his resources and this technology to tell the story he wants to tell in 2044 to the American people.
Yes, I know. Yeah, so I mean, so like I know you live near Harrisburg.
Yeah.
So were you shaped more, say, by what you saw in state government or federal government,
I
like your
think I was
ideas?
more idealistic about the impacts that people can have at the federal level. I always, really regarded the presidency highly, U.S. Senate, Congress. I think the closer I work with state government, the more I realized that there are very imperfect people who not only seek office but win offices at times, and it doesn't always end that the heroes win in those stories. And so I think that's where it started maybe to take some of the shine off of it for me. Maybe the way the dialogue has changed in the country since 2010, where it really has become very polarized. It's a zero sum game of winner take all elections. The only way things get done is if political parties dominate branches of multiple branches of government, and that's for me where I felt like I started to become um, dissatisfied with the tone, tenor, and direction of American politics, and started to wonder, is there something to be had with a countervailing force of a third, fourth, or fifth political dimension in the American political spectrum that could do more? So it's not just this pendulum swinging back and forth, left and right, every 2, 4, 6, 8 years.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I do remember. So like what would be some of can you talk about some of the campaigns you've worked on in the
Yeah, I
past?
worked when Jack Murtha passed away. I think this would have
Okay.
been 2010. I was dispatched to go work for Mark Kritz in the special election to replace Jack. And I had worked both for Jack Murtha and then went on to work for Mark Kritz. And it was like the first election after the Affordable Care Act's passage, and the amount of just resources nationwide that had poured into Johnstown
Mhm.
and that district it really changed the nature of that race and changed the nature of the type of campaign we were trying to run. That's when it really started to get, you said you had the Tea Party movement very, very active in the United States, and that was electrifying people, both good and bad, and saw some just really hateful things starting to emerge in our dialogue as a country. I had already worked on the presidential campaign for Barack Obama and saw how by the time we got to 2012, it was just starting to become this all or nothing bet. Um, when it went to work maybe after that into some state campaigns and started working for R's and D's both, I got to see there were still reasonable people who were working on both sides of the aisle, especially at some of these local, state Senate, state House races. Um, but the deeper and deeper we got and closer we got to 2016, I think that's the watershed moment for me where things just fundamentally changed. Donald Trump had a different affect about campaigning, and he definitely taps into a populist thread in American or a populist gene in American politics. And that has absolutely electrified his supporters. But there's been some consequences to that, and that's what I'm trying to explore in the book is, like where is the end game for some of these threads? And some of the things in the book actually have occurred in this election cycle: an attempted assassination on a presidential candidate, a refusal to provide enough Secret Service protection to third parties, and the list goes on and on. So the book quickly became very relevant, even though it's a futurist story set 20 years in the future, had a lot of lessons suddenly for what we're dealing with in the present term. But I'm retired from politics. I'm not trying to preach as much as I am trying to entertain, but using real life to make the story thrillingly plausible and terrifyingly so, so people could
Mhm.
imagine, yeah, this story could absolutely happen. And does that scare the reader into thinking more carefully about, what does the political landscape evolve into in the United States as more and more technology and money and truth and other things start to come into focus?
Yeah, so I guess it's meant to would you say your books are meant to be sort of like a warning for future trends or
I
like
think a canary
warning?
in the coal mine, yeah. I think it is I would be absolutely satisfied if my books were wrong.
Mhm.
And we are not on a collision course with some of these things. But I do think, and I think what my readers have told me is what's great about the reading is it's not preachy. So you can come to the story from which is unique. It's very hard to come to a political book from across the political spectrum and find relevance and affection for the characters. And that was really hard as a writer because if you try to speak to everyone in the political spectrum with political stories, you end up speaking to no one. So there is some recognition that I am talking to folks like me, folks who feel disillusioned with the partisan nature of things, who feel like we've become too one-dimensional, that there's something better out there for us if we would just be more creative and thoughtful. But that's been the feedback is the story is not preachy. It is entertaining and it is exciting, and you learn something about electoral politics, about campaigns, in the process. And I wrote a prequel, which is a novella called The Senate Deception, teaches the readers about the filibuster and what it would take to reform it in the U.S. Senate, and what are some ways that could happen, and what would be the consequences, good or bad, of doing that. So, again, trying to write realistic political thrillers, not fantastical political thrillers, but truly grounded in reality and facts, that make it both believable and terrifyingly plausible.
Yeah, okay, it's interesting. I'll be at the Mirtha dinner this Saturday. They're having the Jock Mirtha dinner
Awesome.
in in Johnstown. I'll be there filming some of the speakers.
That's great.
And, that is sort of the purpose of this website to try to inform people, about trends and social trends and political trends. So,
Yeah.
and we do have our own race here in Johnstown now between Frank Burns and Amy Bradley. I mean, they're pouring a ton of money into it because the state house is so evenly divided.
Indeed. Indeed.
So certainly we're being bombarded with 30-second ads and they don't, it's just meant to pull your emotional strings. It's not really meant to get you to think or
Hmm.
what do the candidates really stand for.
Yeah. And I think
So
that's what, something that happens in the book is Jackson Piper's running for president and Russell Warner is the president running for re-election. And Warner just decides to unleash fury on Jackson and tell bold-faced lies in his political ads, accusing Jackson of abusing his children and accusing his wife of medical malpractice and murdering people on the operating table, none of which is true, but because people have a hard time discerning facts from fiction, it just becomes this information warfare. And, what is to be gained if we get to a point where politicians who are running for office, who are trying to fulfill their political ambitions, can say literally anything and there's no consequence to just lying in the process, just
mhm.
bold-faced lies. And that's where it really starts to not, it doesn't sit easy. There's, I think, some expectation in American politics that politicians will lie to some extent, but there'll still be some threads of truth with what they're about. what if truth itself is up for sale? And what does that do to a system that kind of is built on some thread of truth and reality in order to function? I think that's where it really starts to become very dangerous.
I agree. So, I mean, even now, like you look at, say, the networks like Fox News, they'll say Republicans good, Democrats bad, and MSNBC will say Democrats good, Republicans bad.
Exactly, right? And they can't both be right. I remember the
Yeah.
days when the news channels were actually news. Remember the anchors would sit at the desk for
Yeah.
24 hours and read headlines and read
Yeah, they
read
had,
stories.
yeah, back when they had an equal time rule and
Yep, yep.
Reagan got rid of.
Yeah, now it's just infotainment. It's just trying to entertain you in 7-minute segments, so I started to write this book 20 years ago when I was a school teacher
Mhm.
after 9/11, and world was a much different place. George W. Bush had won re-election in 2004, and it was a close election in some regards in Ohio and some other states. And I started to explore how had the world changed since 9/11? How had this you know, Texas governor gone from polarizing to suddenly, 76 approval rate and the beginnings of the, endless war culture of Afghanistan and Iraq. And so the story was much different 20 years ago when I began it. But I was teaching a lot of Ray Bradbury, Arthur Miller. And so the story was firstly not that good. And secondly, it's kind of just a diatribe of complaints, political complaints. So the book sat on a shelf for about 8 years. Took it back out. I reworked it some, came up with a different ending. I still wanted to publish the story, but it just wasn't good enough. In the 2016 election, that's what I said, that I started to see things happening in real life that had happened in my story. There were
Mhm.
candidates running that nobody liked for president, and people were kind of like holding their nose and casting a ballot and wondering like what was going to be the potential outcome to a circumstance like that. And I took the book out and gave it to a friend to read, and she gave me some feedback. And by the time January 6th rolled around 2021, I watched the ending of my original manuscript come to life. In the original ending of Bull Moose, the president refuses to accept the results of the election, refuses to leave the
Like
White House.
2020. Okay.
Yeah. And so in the story, they have to mount what mo looks more like an Arab Spring, if you remember that from 2015, a
Mhm.
popular, non-violent, largely uprising of political reform, people demanding change, and then elected people having to, either just murder people or succumb to the pressure. So I went back to this book and said, maybe there's something here. Maybe I'm on to something. And so I rewrote the book start to finish last year. And in the process, discovered the book would be better if it's set in the future. I discovered an AI sentient character named Ziggy, which is a nod to Quantum Leap, and really started to explore some other more creative ways to tell a story using, I think, stronger commercial fiction structures and story pacing. And it became a much better written book and committed to getting it published, not with the intention of being a prognosticator about election 2024, but I at the time thought this was going to be an extremely boring election. People who read political thrillers and political fiction would be looking for entertainment because this rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump was going to bore the country, and thought, boy, my book would be great entertainment. And I had that completely wrong. So,
Yeah,
um,
well, I mean, certainly Kamala Harris has lightened up the race.
well,
Um,
and
you know, I
10 days after my book published, you had Biden on stage, not able to complete sentences, calls for his removal from the ticket, talk of an open convention. It just became this like pent up energy of political excitement, just kind of, and then Trump had an assassination attempt in Butler. And so all of this is kind of connected back to Pennsylvania. Jackson Piper, my main character, is from Pennsylvania. So he's from Pittsburgh, actually. So it very much comes into focus that, I had it wrong that this was going to be a boring election cycle, but I also found that people were excited now, right now, especially to read this story and see some of the echoes to the stormy present.
Okay, so you're happy with how the book's selling?
I think it could always do better. I'm a new author. I'm still finding my platform. I still
Okay.
set a personal goal of selling 2,000 copies of this, which 95% of authors will never hit 2,000 copies. So
Mhm.
I'm about a third of the way there. So I feel good about that. And I'm committed to the
Well,
series. Book two comes out election day. So I'm definitely excited about the idea of continuing the series on and I think really building a stronger readership once we get three or four books in this series out in the market.
okay, so this is going to be a series about the bull. Is it going to be like you call it, like the Bull Moose series?
Yes, Bull Moose series and really the whether or not this political party can survive and can it reform American politics in the way it intends, or does it become susceptible to the same corrupting pressures that the two major parties in the book, the old party and the other party, kind of have dominated the landscape with.
Okay, so yeah, certainly you gave me a lot here to think about.
That's good.
Um, so I was gonna say, I mean, for a second it sounded like, yeah, you were once a school teacher that went into politics. I mean, maybe you sort of followed the similar path as Tim Walls,
Maybe. I actually Tim and I
but
spoke when I ran for county commissioner in
oh,
Cumberland
really?
County, Pennsylvania. He was a congressman at the time. A friend of mine worked for him, and so he gave me a call and said, "Hey, keep it up. I know this is hard work, but it's going to be worth it." I lost that election by less than 200 votes. It was a difficult
That's
loss,
cool.
but it was still to have that story in my mind of, having this connection to this person who, is now
Hmm.
seeking the vice
Well,
presidency is pretty exciting.
well, I did live in Cumberland County, like, well, 20 years ago, and yes, I do know it's very conservative. So, well, good for you. You did, you know, it was a close race.
Yes,
So,
yes. And sometimes, it hurts when you lose close races. I can feel for Al Gore
mhm.
because I would have
Yeah,
perhaps rather have been blown out because there's just a lot
or
of second guessing when you come.
Or Hillary Clinton a little bit.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. But I've made peace with it now. It's been years, and I feel frankly I'm better off to have not really. Things happen for a reason in your life, and I feel like that was
Hmm.
not meant to do that. I maybe was meant to gain the stories and that perspective. But I find that writing about it is far more personally fulfilling for me than any day I ever spent at a rubber chicken dinner or knocking on doors. That was important work, but this is so much more fun. I got to be honest. So
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I guess so. I mean, I feel like, I mean, of course, this county here, Cambria County, has swung pretty. It used to be a reliable Democratic county, but it's now swung heavily towards Trump. And, it's just, excuse me, it's just, I mean, I feel like the important thing is to inform people, put it
hmm
out there. I mean, some of the problems the Democrats are having, I mean, my personal opinion is they partly brought it on themselves.
self-inflicted for sure. I think they've lost their economic message. I think they've lost their connection to the average working person,
Yeah.
and they've made their campaigns too much about the identity politics that had dominated the Republican Party in the 90s and the early 2000s. It's like that they
Yeah.
flipped. Now the Republican Party has a strong economic message, at least. The Democratic Party is all about,
Mhm.
this personality politics and but I think frankly the real challenge is as we're approaching, election day is neither candidate really seems to be offering the bold big vision that maybe other transformative leaders in our history have offered at a time of national crisis. And so what I
Yeah.
think will end up happening is no matter who wins, there'll be buyer's remorse and people will feel like things are still unsettled and we want hungry for more. And maybe it's that moment where that transformative figure who is out in the woods as a governor or a business person will suddenly get their moment and see it's their time and become the Reagan or Clinton or Kennedy or you know Roosevelt that we need at this moment to suddenly kind of take the country forward. But I do feel I'm old enough now to say, lived through enough of politics to say it does feel like we're in a bit of a malaise, and it's wondering like how we're going to wake up from this and what's going to finally move the country forward.
Yeah. I mean, another problem, another self-inflicted wound is Biden's slavish loyalty to Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, he may curse him out privately, but he's giving him billions of dollars. I mean, it is hurting him and hurting the Democrats in states like Michigan with a large Arab American population. So, I mean, I
Yeah,
do feel.
and I hear from my own kids. They want to understand
Mhm.
why we should continue to give $8 billion in large swaths to foreign nations while they look around their country and see people who are hungry, they see people who are homeless, they see,
Mhm.
they have no field trips now at their school district because the district can't afford these things. And they just can't compute it. And I don't blame them, right? I mean, I try to explain to them that it's apples and oranges or it's not necessarily net zero gain. Like you can have both things. We choose not to at times, but it's still for their generation doesn't make sense. And I think that's a lot of Americans are starting to wonder like, where's the balance here between these choices?
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. And so I guess there's no future political runs for you.
No, Michael is retired from politics. I'm happy to say. I will be happy to write about it, but I don't want to be on the ballot ever again. It's okay. So
Yeah. Okay. I was on the ballot once. I ran for city council. I mean, as an independent, and it was hard getting volunteers and things like that. So,
it is.
but it is what it is.
Yep. Then I did serve in a borough council. I did serve on, municipal authorities in my time. I felt like I've given my service in those younger days. I've got young kids now. It's better I focus on my family and running business. But folks can go out and check out my website, michaelfedorbooks.com. You can find me wide. I'm on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, and everything in between. And just search Michael Fedor Bull Moose, and you'll find these books. And I'd love for listeners to get on this journey early, discover this really exciting world. There's so much that happens in this book. There's so many rich characters, and be ready for book two on election day, called Tree of Liberty. Picks up
Oh,
where the
it's coming
story
out on.
yeah, and it picks up minutes after the end of this story and continues this question of how will the election be resolved because it's not quite resolved at the end of Bull Moose. And so it's
Mhm.
this very serious question about what it's going to take. And I am very worried we might be on a similar path with election 2024. That's the one thing I don't want to be right about is having to face a contingent election, but that's what Jackson Piper has to face in order to really get to his ultimate quest, the presidency. So please check it out,
Yeah.
and I'm really
Okay.
appreciative
And
of the
I'm
time.
sure, yeah, you'll see I'm sure there's always lots of Faustian bargains you have to make in public life. And, I do feel like maybe if people were better informed, at least, and more involved, I think that's the key to better civics.
No question. Good information makes good citizens. I think that's the lesson this book and anything has. Better informed citizenry, the better results we'll get.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your time, and I'm gonna stop recording now. And I thank you for your time, and I hope I've at least given you some free ad. I'm happy to give you some free advertising for your books.
Thanks, Paul. It's been great talking to you today, and
All right.
thrilled about what you're doing for Johnstown and the area. So keep it
Yes,
up.
I'm sure I'll tell Nina LaCastro you said hi. You remember
Do
her?
that. Yes, yes, please do.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, and
You bet.
enjoy the rest of your day.